changing the meaning of that becomes the space where we have to be man enough. And I'll say this now with no apology. We have to be man enough to know when to say no and to respectfully take ourselves away from. That's strength. That's self-discipline. That's self-respect.
Wisdom.
Right? So we have to redefine the meaning of weakness from here and here. And that's how we can start breaking the stamina of the stigma.
I love it. Welcome to the Phase 4 podcast, inspired by Vishen Lakiani and Ajit Nawalkar, co-founders of EverCoach, a division of Vine Valley. In this podcast, we speak to coaches and creatives about where they were, where they are, and where they are going. This is the intersection of what we focus on expands, and your story is your superpower. Our guest today is Rolando Jaime. He is the owner of xyspark.org, and he's a men's life coach where he helps men discover the best versions of themselves. In addition, he's an author and a psychotherapist, and today we're going to talk about all that and more. And Rolando, welcome to the podcast.
Excited to be here, JP. Excited to be here, buddy. Thanks for the invite, man.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. I always like to begin with just tell us a little bit more about yourself and how did you end up in this space?
Well, I was born and raised in Kingston, Jamaica. Okay. I grew up in the urban community and, I saw a lot and experienced a lot, gang violence, experienced a lot of trauma and grief in my own life because a lot of my childhood friends, I saw where many of them, as much as 14 of them, disappeared out of my life within a 2-year window. So that's how intense the community, the gang violence was in those areas. And, I want to say myself, I merely made it through that, to be where I am today. And at that time in my life, I never understood how to deal with trauma. I never understood how to acknowledge how that impacted my life. I never understood the entire process of, emotional literacy and being in tune with my emotions, because the culture was, the person is dead, why mourn, why talk about it, why complain, move on, But then years later, as I started to grow my own self and started to get more exposed and understand psychology and, and spirituality and emotional, needs, I realized that in my own life, there was a lot of pain, a lot of trauma, a lot of things rather that I needed to be able to deal with. So as I went off to university, did my first degree, went off again and did my second degree, I became more and more mindful about my own traumas, my own challenges. I became more mindful about the cultural barriers that I needed to address. I became more aware of what the masculine code was and how society has handed down to us as men a belief that sinks deep, cultures, partners, socially, spiritually, psychologically. And so after doing several years of work on myself, when I left the community, JP, and got into university, it was just there in my mind, what can I do? How can I? Because all the pieces that I wrestle with back then and for several years is there anything that I could have done? Those are my good friends. We grew up together, and some of them ended up even having conflicts with each other. When we were kids, we were all running up and down in the streets together. Okay. So then I became more interested in learning more about how I can support men, and so I started this move as it relates to educating myself. But the first thing that I had to do, I had to work on me, right? I had to get counseling. I had to learn to be in touch with my emotions. I had to learn to challenge some of the cultural norms. I, it was a lot of work, hard work, okay? And it got to a point in my life now where I say, okay, let me take that deep dive. So I started to do lots of research. I started to look into what can I do as a man to support more men, not just locally but internationally. And so XY Spark was born over a decade ago. All right. I remember the first time I spoke to two of my colleagues. I was at work. I was working in an organization, and those two guys were still very close friends even now. We shared an office together, and I said to them, I want to start a brand, a company for men. And they said to me, Rolando, you should go for it, man, because we think you do great with that. And he said, but what I did, they said, man, just go for it. So then, I started to work, I started to pray, I started to research, okay? And the funny piece is when I did my research back when I did my master's over a decade ago, I did my research on men who are um who are domestic violence victims.
Your thesis?
Yes.
Okay.
My master's, right? And from that, it just blew my mind about how there's a minuscule amount of supports available for men. So I'm like, wow, this is crazy, man. What can I do? So then I continued, and so when the pandemic hit us in 20 in its full flight, I sat down. I had a good friend who was into you know um graphic design and all that stuff, and I called him up and I shared with him my ideas, and he picked my brain and said, hey, I want something that captures men. So then XY spark, X and Y chromosome, men do have that. So I said, but something that is so okay, XY spark. So he sat down with his designer team and they came back to me with all these difference. And I say, this one is it. Hence, the birth of the brand of XY Spark now started to explode it in the virtual space. And so, hence, it became XY Spark. And since then, I've been passionately seeking to change or break the stamina of the stigma around men's mental health. Because more and more, I'm learning that as men, we really are not being fully aware and conscious about when our mental health is out of sync. Hence, we look at the rate of suicides, for example, in Canada. I'm just talking about Canada. If we go worldwide, it may just blow us out of the park. But we talk about over 4,000 suicides a year in Canada alone, and 75% of that is all men, right? So there's definitely a stamina that is consistent, and the stigma that goes with a man stepping out of his quote unquote comfort zone and saying, I am really feeling out of it. What can I do? It is a big thing, JP.
Yeah, and I love that stamina of the stigma because it's a mindset. Like we're not allowed to talk about it. We have to be tough. And the more science comes out with new books and information, we're learning that no, we actually need to let it go and release it and at least face it instead of just push it back down where it's just going to stay trapped in our body.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And there are so many ways, JP, that as men we have normalized pushing that down. Hence, when you look at sometimes, you look at how much drugs, how much alcohol. Why is it that sometimes we're huge womanizers, for example? What are we searching for? Okay, when you look at, a man being depressed, does he know what that feels like? How does he work with that? Right? We look at, a lot of men, they hide in the gym. A lot of guys, they're hiding behind being, chiseled and stuff. And, a lot of guys, they hide behind tattoos and extremities, right? Aggressive behaviors. And I could go on and on, You see it in athletes, you see it in guys who are on the world stage. You're talking about big names, basketball players, soccer players. It could go on, and a lot of these guys, they hide behind these facades. They hide behind the facade of being a celebrity, right? But when you go behind the scenes, and look at a Will Smith, for example, a celebrity, but behind the scene, right? So because of all of that stuff that's going on as men, we have not really learned how to say, hey, it's time for me to come out of hiding. It's time for me to ask for help. It's time for me to, stop living in denial. It's time for me to stop listening to the internal critique, which is sometimes our greatest enemy, that internal critique. It's time for me to just step out of my comfort zone and admit that I need help. And that stamina, JP, it's not an easy thing to break.
No, definitely not. And I think when it's such a big thing, right? Like just a simple thing of like a baseball player getting $400 million and a doctor getting $400,000. There's such a disconnect with something like that then it just trickles all the way throughout. And there's so many questions. We can go in so many ways here, but like, does it have to get so bad for somebody where they just have nowhere else to turn? Then they can start facing themselves? Because it seems to me like, and I've been there in my past, people are looking for answers always outside of themselves. And nobody wants to do that work because it's hard and difficult and scary and what if, and it's uncertain.
And JP, as you asked that question, during my work as I continue to do research, I stumbled upon intellectual humility, right? And what intellectual humility does is, JP, it challenges us to ask this big question. And when I saw that, I'm saying, you know what? Every man needs to take some time to ask that question, because here's the question that it challenges us to ask. What if all that I was taught is flawed? All right? And many times, JP, that's a tough question to ask. Why? Because now, in order to ask that question, it may expose me to admit that maybe I'm just not going down the right path after all. Maybe I was distracted. Maybe what I'm doing is wrong, right? And most of us as men are not willing to ask that question, because if all that I was taught is flawed, that means I need to go on this journey to find myself, to find out who I am. But that's a tough thing to admit, because then that is going to challenge me to work hard and do something differently, right? And as men, we will work hard on everything else. We will invest in everything else. But when it comes to working hard on ourselves, the expression that we use a lot of the time is, you know what? I like to put myself on the back burner.
Yeah, it's so true, right? Because, man, it's just scary to realize that your whole world might not be true. So it's just easier not to even deal with it. I don't know if you know Ramana Maharshi, but he wrote a book called Who Am I? And he says, you start asking these questions, and no matter what the answer is, and you can keep deep diving into it. Okay, is that true? Who am I? Keep going. All of them are not true. There's another part that's happening where we just adopt these pieces from society here and there. But man, this is such an important topic because, like, okay, even if people didn't know before COVID, everybody experienced some type of loneliness, separation, isolation. We're all different from after that. And so there's a collective trauma that's happening there.
Yeah.
And so is it, for men specifically, is it a matter of just like getting one-on-one to the side, or is it better if we're in a group trying to bring it to a group? Or I think I told you how I facilitate those groups, and sometimes it's hard to get the guys to speak, right? But if you catch them before everyone else enters the room, or hey, can I speak to you for a minute at the end, then a whole different story. So I'm just kind of curious, maybe for my own.
As men, John, we are naturally reserved, especially when we're in certain groups where we feel like if I say what I say, the other guys in here are going to think I'm a sissy. They're going to think I'm weak. They're probably going to turn their noses up at me and wonder what's his problem. But here's the funny thing. The funny thing about that, JP, is that every one of us have got to bring ourselves to that place where we stop worrying too much about the opinions of the crowd and worry about what's best for my mental wellness. If a guy wants to leave and laugh, that's his business, right? But while he's laughing at me, what's his problem? Right? Because there are some of us as men, JP, where we feel like it's our role to maintain the masculine title. It's our role to maintain the hierarchy of being a man, right? And so along comes those perceptions, those cultural expectations, those beliefs and perceptions that we have about what or how a man should be. And we show up in big groups, right? With all these reservations that, hey, I need to make sure I stay within the confines of this culturally constructed belief system so that I don't disappoint, quote unquote, those who are depending on me, right? And it's not a space for the weak, because what we've got to realize to JP is that we have got to learn to redefine the meaning of weakness, right? Once upon a time, everyone believed that weakness is if you express emotions. Weakness is if you ask for help. Weakness is if you say, I really don't know the answer. Weakness is if you let your partner know that, honey, you know what, today, I'm just not feeling the best. I just need to rest, right? All of that is seen as weakness. Weakness is if I show up for my friends and, everyone is drinking, and if I'm not drinking, it's because I'm weak. Weakness is if I say no to my friends and they offer me to do a couple lines. Weakness is if my friends show up with a quarter gram of marijuana and say, hey, let's smoke some. If I say no, that's weakness. I'm not man, right? But changing the meaning of that becomes the space where we have to be man enough, and I'll say this now with no apology, we have to be man enough to know when to say no and to respectfully take ourselves away from. That's strength, that's self-discipline, that's self-respect.
Wisdom.
Right? So we have to redefine the meaning of weakness from here and here, and that's how we can start breaking the stamina of this stigma.
I love it. Can you share an example of like a breakthrough moment you've had from coaching through this kind of approach?
Oh yeah, it's powerful. I have a number of videos that are out there on my YouTube channel from men who I've worked with, and one of the powerful things that I've heard, I'm hearing, and it seems to be there's some consistency with it. Where I remember this one client who said to me, Rolando has sort of helped me to look through a new lens as it relates to being a man and being a healthy partner for somebody else. All right. And if I had the time, I would just share those with you. Sometimes I share the feedback from my clients on my social media pages and stuff. They're still probably there now, but I've had so many powerful experiences working with men, because the piece also, as it relates to the question that you asked, JP, is, of course, there are some men who they'll do better one-on-one than in groups because of the pride that goes with that. All right? If I talk to you one-on-one, I'll be vulnerable. But in a group, I will not, and I dare not, show myself up, because I have to maintain the respect of the pack, right? And when we talk about that, that is coming from, when you do more research, you talk about the hegemonic perspective of masculinity, hegemonic masculinity, where, the man, that man needs to maintain that hierarchy, like, hey, he's a lion and he has to stay a lion. And when he sits, he commands respect from the pack. And those guys who show any vulnerability, they are wimps. So I'm superior to them.
Right. It's ironic because you're still looking for approval outside, right? And then as you're, Joy, before you said the lion in the pack, I was thinking, is there an evolutionary perspective to this where you couldn't stray from the pack because you might end up outside of the tribe? And then what are you going to do then, right?
Yeah. And so the fear of that, JP, the fear of that is what caused a lot of men to hide, to suffer in silence, to go to the extreme of committing suicide, because, they don't want to appear as if they are weak. So it's like, why not forget it all and just disappear?
I've been a friend of mine just a little while ago, and this was the guy before COVID would always say, I would never do that. I don't know how people could do that. And I'm like, you don't know because you're not in their shoes. But it happened just now, like maybe less than a year ago. And it's like the saddest thing in the world, right? And it's always like, what if you just reached out? What if you just lasted one more day?
Mm-hmm. And that is why, JP, for me, the passion for me in XY Spark is creating a safe space for men. And when I do these interviews, I don't invite men to come. I invite men to, hey, if you feel like a group would work for you, great. But if you know you need to work on yourself, my role is, here's a safe space. Okay? I've been through it. I understand what it means to struggle with alcohol use. I understand what it means to struggle with drug use. Okay? I understand what it means to go through a divorce. Okay? I understand. I've been there, done that. I understand to struggle with depression. I understand to struggle with anxiety. I get it. Okay? I get the struggle around, hey, as a man, I get the struggle where I feel that, hey, culturally I should not. Listen, the first time I allowed myself to really experience and feel my emotions fully was in my 30s, because that's not something that was allowed, quote unquote, growing up in certain cultures, in certain communities. Every day you get up out of bed, you need to be that tough, hard-skinned individual who has no emotions or no feelings.
Yeah. I wonder, what would you have kind of advice for men who are like, they're hesitant to seek out coaching, but they think they know it, they're struggling with depression, they want to change, but they just don't even know what to do?
It's just remembering this, that asking for help is not weakness, it's wise. Okay? And some of the powerful things that I say when I reach out to men is to remember that your your first responsibility as a man is not to try hard to be the best husband that you can be, or the best father that you can be, or the best employee or employer, the best engineer, the best lawyer, the best doctor, the best pilot, the best engineer. That's not your number one responsibility. Number one responsibility is that you have to slow down and remember that it's okay to be human. And when you're human, you can fulfill all those other roles being your true, authentic self. Okay? Because when you're human, you're in touch with who you are. You're emotionally accessible. You're psychologically grounded. You're socially savvy. Okay?
Yeah. I think so. Some of these are CBT tools that I'm going to ask about, but journaling, meditation, self-care. Self-care is probably the best way to describe this. Is that a part of it? We need to learn emotional intelligence. I'm thinking education equals expansion, because now you can see the world differently. And then it's like, oh, I'm not weak. Actually, this is just part of the thing that's trapped in my body. I didn't even know.
Yeah. And I love what you just said, JP, because if you checked me 20 years ago, sound like a long time, eh? But if you checked me 20 years ago, JP, I would probably be asking, what is he talking about? Right? If you checked me 20 years ago. And when as I started to grow, JP, and learn, I realized that, wait a minute, exposure is what strengthens experience and is what takes you to that next level. Just let me plug in my computer and JP by okay.
Yeah, so as he's doing that, we'll just think about things like journaling. If you're not sure where to start, write out your thoughts. What happens a lot of times is we get stuck in our head. We're not even sure what's true or not. Who else put it there? And they all get tied up like shoelaces. So if you start journaling on paper, just journal your thoughts, you'll start to see, oh my God, I don't even believe that. I've just been holding on to that for 20 years because my uncle said that when I was a kid or something.
And, something that is based on research psychology, we talk about the nature-nurture theory, for example, JP. Okay. We become products of our environment. All right. And as I mentioned intellectual humility, I'm going to roll back into it a little bit to concretize this point. The nature-nurture theory, as I look around me as I'm growing up, who do I look to the most to set the example? My mom, my dad, my grandfather, okay, my coach, some of the bodies in my community, right? And they have a lot to do with my grooming and my exposure to my understanding of, hey, what it means to be a man. That's it. So now I grow up, and oftentimes by virtue of not choice but circumstance, our brain is capturing the data. So as I grow, I start to live my life based on what I was exposed to in the culture, based on that, and the culture, it goes right across. If I grew up in church, there are elders or pastors or leaders there that I seek to do what? Be like, right? I pattern, so it's like my little brain is just capturing data from all the sources, especially as I interact with, now here I am, I've grown up, and I believe wholeheartedly that this is what it looks like to be a man, to be a husband, to be a father, okay? And so here I am with all this information, not knowing what to do with it. So then I start taking parts of it that I feel sits best with what I'm doing or where I'd like to go. But here's the piece. We have the real self and the ideal self that's coming into that. So there's a nature-nurture, okay, where, the ideal versus the real self, there's a clashing that's going on. And in order for us to have peace of mind and balance, we have to now learn how to bring the two together, take what makes sense, trash what doesn't, and build something that's unique for you. But the challenge is is that oftentimes that requires a lot of self-reflection. That as an end, we don't find it too much time to do that. Let me give you an example of that, JP. If a guy gets up and he says, hey, you know what? I want to get me a Mercedes. I want to get me a BMW. I want to buy myself a Ferrari. He saves, if it's a Cristiano Ronaldo, he doesn't need to save. He can buy it from one paycheck.
Wow.
He saves, okay? And he saves for a year, 2 years. And he'll go buy himself that car. But he will not sit down and say, you know what, man? I'm struggling. I need to invest in myself. So the idea is when you can put a price point on a machine, a house, when you can put a price point on a relationship, I'm getting married. Someone say, I'm getting married. This is a budget, 50 grand, 100K. He doesn't consider himself he doesn't realize that investing in himself is priceless. And as a coach, when I'm working with men, I say to them, hey, if you want to work with me and you're considering it, that, hey, it's too expensive, are you saying that you're not worth that much? How much do you think you're worth? $100?
Right.
$50? Are you saying that Ferrari has more value than your own mental health and wellness? So I say to men, and all the men at Target, I say to them, if you are ready to work on yourself, then you can come and connect with me. If you're not ready, I would say don't waste your time or mine, because I'm very passionate I'm serious about this. Okay. And so when I work with men, I say I'm ready to work with men who are ready to do the work. Because as a life coach, I'm not going to be doing the work for you. I'm going to challenge you to do the work, which means confronting several of those layers that has kept you isolated for some guys for decades.
I got two things there. So the first thing with the Ferrari, right? So like whatever the number is, somebody will save that every single day until they get enough money, but they won't do 5 push-ups every single day or eat healthy every single day because it's boring and it takes a long time. Both of them might take a long time, but they just don't see the investment in themselves the same way. But the other one, yesterday I was talking to a friend. She I told her all the things. Okay, this is what you want. This is what you need to do. Are you willing to do it? No, I'm not. And I was like, well, then if I was going to be straight, completely honest with you, I don't want to be your coach because you're not going to do the work that you need to do, which she articulated it to me pretty much. This is what I need to do. This is what I want. And then she said, well, it just seems like a lot. And I said, well, isn't it worth the next 25 years of your life to have health, wealth, and vitality as you grow older? She goes, oh, you never said it that way. And so then she's like, yeah, I'm in for sure. But I was just like, whoa.
Yeah, it's true, man. And that's how we view the world. Another thing that we as men we do, we want immediate gratification. So anything that causes us to do too much work or to stay at for too long, we flee from it because we want it to happen right away.
Right? Marshmallow test.
Yeah, yeah. But when you talk about retraining our brains, when you talk about behavioral change, when you talk about, shifting that mindset, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not something that you can go and buy at a dollar store.
Right. Should we be teaching emotional intelligence in schools at like really, really young ages?
100%. And the piece too is we've got to look at who are we going to be asking to teach that, because, anyone can show up and say they're teaching it, but do they themselves practice emotional literacy? And what is emotional literacy? Because, a lot of times when men hear about emotional literacy and women sometimes hear about it, it's almost as if, what's your problem, right? But emotional literacy, is the beginning of a lot of things, because it gives us now that insight to be in touch with our emotions and also to be in touch with the emotions of those with whom we're interacting, right? That is a huge step. And so, as men, that emotional, mindfully mindfully being connected with our emotional selves is where we need to start in order to break that cycle, to break the stamina of the stigma of men's mental health.
Wow. When I was young, I used to drink, right? And a lot. And I never really enjoyed it. I would just always get drunk and just sit there and blah. But everyone did it. So I was like, oh, I guess this is what we do. And then as you go older, you kind of realize, well, you guys can keep on doing that. It's not fun for me. And now I see my friends that were doing it with 20 years ago and they're still doing it. And I wonder, like, is this fun? Maybe it is for them, but I'm definitely a different breed. I think as far as men's life coach, I wonder where you see that going in the future, because like it's only going to be a 45-degree upward angle of people needing more help, especially with technology and things like this. And you're talking about delayed gratification. Man, YouTube killed that a couple years ago with shorts, right? TikTok, those guys killed delayed gratification.
Yeah. And you know something, JP, when you talk about drinking and all that stuff, it comes out to emotional literacy again, because the word that we want to put in there is association. All the things that a lot of men associate alcohol, drinking excessive alcohol, and excessive drug use and all that, the association of that is, hey, I'm bored. I need something to, so they drink, right? I need to celebrate, so they drink. I'm going camping, so I need to drink. I'm having a barbecue, so I have to drink. So you see, one simple word, JP, association. And just that belief that we have there, that if I'm doing all these things, this need to be included. And the thing that I smile about is what about those who don't drink? Is it that they'll remain bored? Is it that they'll never enjoy a campfire? Is that they'll never have a barbecue? And that's how I would say simplistic that sounds as a
Funny.
association.
Yeah. It's funny because, yeah, like when you're there, you think you're missing out. That might be a part of it too, right? But then it's like, no, man, now I'm getting to see sunrises and sunsets that I never even noticed. And then one other thing was about, oh man, not emotional intelligence. Oh, like neuroplasticity. So then a lot of this is just neuroplastic effect from just doing it over and over again. Like your body just gets up and, hey, it's Friday night, we better go to the bar, or for an example. But so how do we help to break that, or where do you start with that part of it? Just changing your routine.
No, that's a powerful question, JP, because some things, when we do it over time, it's almost as if it becomes our default, right? Sometimes we do it without even thinking. Our brains and our bodies has gotten so used to it, right? Hence why you have alcohol and drug dependency, okay? Because we do it so often and so many times that the brain and body starts to believe, I need this to function, right? Which is why when you talk about someone who is in recovery, right, they say you need at least that 2-year window in order for your body to sort of, reset itself, right? That's why they talk about pause, right? Post-acute withdrawal symptoms, or pause, PAWS. Because when someone uses excessive drugs and alcohol, they get to that place now where a dependency happens. That's why when they stop, they have withdrawal symptoms now. All right. And that pause, the symptoms of that pause can last for 2 years, right?
Yeah, because once 2 years, the spontaneous recovery is gone out of it.
It's not that it's gone totally, but the experts are saying at least 2 years you're going to still experience those post-acute withdrawal syndromes, sweating and nightmares and all that stuff happens because the dependency that develop over time. The brain is telling the body that you need it, and when you take it away, all of a sudden the body starts to react. Where is it? So you have those symptoms, right? But over time, as you change your lifestyle, okay, start eating healthier, start exercising, start getting quality sleep, start detoxifying through, drinking lots of water, eating lots of veggies, you name it. But just a total lifestyle change, right? Then your body starts repairing itself. Your brain has the ability to repair itself because alcohol destroys brain cells. So when they talk about the neuroplasticity and how that happens, the experts say that it takes a minimum of 21 days for change to occur. Depending on the habit or stuff, it could take longer. So we're talking about a minimum, right? And that consistency, as you practice and keep practicing, then what you do now, you start replacing the dependency on the unhealthy stuff and you build up a dependency on healthy stuff.
Right? That's good. They're just tips.
Yeah.
I love it. I think you said sleep back there, and I'm wondering, what do you think about sleep? I think for me, I've changed my whole life, but sleep seems for me, and it might be just my age or whatever, but it seems like it's the biggest thing that has just helped me so much. And I don't know. I would love to know what you think about sleep.
Sleep deprivation is another terrible thing, because a lot of us, what we do as men, know what the research is saying. The research is saying that the sleep that you get before midnight, right, is more repairs the body more than the sleep that you get after midnight. That's one thing. Number two is the research came out, I think it was a year and a half or so ago, where they're saying that when you get into that sleep cycle and you go, your body goes through those different REM sleep, because you need that REM sleep, the rapid eye movement sleep. Your body goes through different periods of REM sleep throughout the night.
Yeah, 5 cycles altogether, right?
Right? The body now, what the research is saying is that the body has a way of detoxing itself when you sleep.
Yeah, I heard this recently too, about just like the brain is just throwing out the garbage and repairing, making new ones. I was telling my kids this one, like it's not, I think we were talking a little about running and working out, right? But it's not like when you go home, you do have to or when you finish your exercise, you do need a little rest. But that's not when the adaptation, it's when you go to sleep. That's when the real work happens.
Listen, the body is designed to repair itself. If we treat our bodies right, longevity is a part of that. All right. And so definitely, having a healthy sleep cycle is a part of that.
Right. So I definitely want to respect your time. We got quite a bit. I want to go into your book. I want to go into coaching. But before we go into that, I have a question I ask everybody. And you've kind of said it earlier without using the words. The tagline of this podcast is "What we focus on expands." So it's called the Phase 4 podcast because the 6-phase meditation by Vishen Lakhiani has 6 different phases: gratitude, compassion, your perfect day, your future self, a blessing, all of it. Phase 4 is about creating your future 3 years out. So what does Rolando's practice and life look like 3 years from today?
That's powerful. You know what my mantra is, JP? This is my mantra. I even have the shirts now that persons have been ordering. Personal development is not an event. It's a lifestyle.
I love it. That's on your website right at the very top as well, right?
Right? So for me, JP.
Oh, sorry, somewhere else I saw that.
Yeah, that's the mantra that I live my life by every single day. So 3 years from now, you're saying, where do I see myself? I see myself continuing to promote and challenge the stamina of the stigma of mental health. Why? Because I believe that has to begin with me. Recognize it, confront it, challenge it, create safe spaces for more men to actually talk about it. Because when we talk about emotional literacy, you know, it talks about my ability to recognize and understand, label, and express my feelings.
Yeah.
Recognize it, understand it, label it, and express my feelings. And so that's my passion. That's my goal, right?
That,
Personal development is not an event. It's a life.
It's a lifestyle, 100%. And it's so crazy. I use one that says go low, go slow. And it doesn't matter what it is, but if you do a little bit and a little bit, it's like compound interest. I think maybe could you tell us about your books and some of the writing and then
Yeah. So the first one I published is Give Myself Permission to Grow. And I wrote that book, JP, because
that's the title?
yes.
I didn't know if you were like doing it to give yourself permission to grow.
No, that's the title. Giving myself permission to grow, right? 7 solutions of personal development. And in this came about by me as I do my research. I recognize that the major thing that I first need to address is what are my own barriers to my growth. And I have to give myself permission to step out of that. I have to give myself permission to recognize where I'm missing the mark and start working on it. So that's where that passion came from. Giving myself, every man, you have to give yourself permission to acknowledge the things that needs to be addressed in your own life, in my own life, so that I can start evolving into
including the starting point, like where you are today.
Absolutely.
I got one that just came up, and so I might not formulate the question right, but I'm thinking about Maslow's hierarchy, and like, what if you're just stuck at the very bottom and you can barely get your food and everything? How are you supposed to get everything else right if you basic human needs are not taken care of?
No, that piece becomes a really, really deep question, because for people who are stuck, okay, people are stuck for many different reasons. Sometimes it's psychologically, sometimes it's physically, right? Sometimes people are stuck because of fear. This is all I know. If I let go of this, what am I going to have? What am I going to hold on to? Who am I going to be? So there are so many different reasons why people are stuck. Sometimes it's by choice, it's by circumstance. Sometimes it's because of a psychological construct.
And they don't even like it. It just is familiar.
Yeah, familiarity, right? So getting there and how do you help these persons, is, as a coach, one thing I'm mindful of is this, JP, is if I recognize that you're stuck, I first need to check in with you. Okay, what are you willing to invest in moving from here, not to the top of the totem, but just to move from this step to one layer up?
And so part of that is you can't actually force someone or make someone change unless they want to?
No.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, like, as we're having this conversation, like all of a sudden I read this book called Gene Eating. It's all about genetics, and he talks about gluten sensitivity. He talks about everything, but gluten sensitivity, how it wasn't anywhere, but now it's everywhere, and like 20% of people have it. And part of his science or reasoning behind it is that we see it and we hear about it, and there's a gluten-free aisle, and now people are like, oh, is that me? Just like any first-year psychology student starts reading things and go, oh, do I have that? Is that me? But so this gluten sensitivity is because all of a sudden it's everywhere. And so if we start having these conversations, and if we just keep promoting and amplifying what you're doing, what I'm doing, is it only a matter of time where it will get everywhere and men will start to respond in bigger numbers?
Men, as men, what I've learned, JP, is we naturally like to stay with what is most familiar, right? It doesn't mean we should stop proclaiming or making that loud cry, all right? Absolutely. But what we've got to also be okay to accept is that the results of that is out of our control. We have no idea, but we have to keep doing the work that we're doing because that's what we're passionate about. All right. And we open the gate, we send the invitation, but then we have to respectfully say, hey, the final decision is in your court. The ball is in your court.
The saying, right? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink.
Yeah.
So I kind of took it away from your books because you just told us about your first book, but tell me about other books.
Yeah, so there's also 3 ebooks that I have out there, the Masculinity Reset, Renew, Reload. And these books they're on Amazon, and those are just giving men little tidbits of things that they can do. And the thing that I did not hold back on doing is sharing my own story in all of these books, right? So that men can capture it. And then the last one is What God Thinks About Psychology. And it talks about the relationship between psychology and spirituality, sort of bringing into the conversation that reality that a lot of the stuff that psychologists or researchers are promoting now, it has always been written there in the spiritual realm. It's just that, hey, many persons think I have nothing to do with spirituality, but they'll go to a psychologist. They cultivate therapy, they talk about emotional regulation, talk about being mindful. It's all there in the spiritual.
Yeah, some of the yogic stuff is like, how did these guys know that 2,500 years ago or whatever? It is, some of it's just mind blowing,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. So yeah, that's
And
that.
and I was gonna ask you, is there a spiritual element, like, because you definitely can't force that, but for me personally, I can't do it any other way. But that's a tough one. And then masculine, feminine, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, yeah. So one thing that as a man, we are more susceptible to following or promoting the role of men versus women, right? When you look in a lot of relationships, for example, there are men who believe that there are certain things in the home that they should not do. It's a woman's role. And that may or may not be true because absolutely. And there are some things in the home that if the woman is better at it than him, that's fine, but he should never tell himself, I can't or I'll never do it, because that sometimes causes friction in relationships. Okay. So it's being mindful, a lot of men, about, hey, you know what? I can learn to change a diaper. I can learn to, make a bottle for the baby. I can learn, to cook a meal. I can learn to do some of the domesticated chores too. I can learn to call my daughters here and don't feel like, hey, what would my buddy think if he came over and saw me doing this? You see what I'm saying? So it's all of that. When you talk about male, female, I want my appeal to some of the women is because there are women who do not allow men to be human, right? I spoke to guys who say, Rolando, I dare not let my partner know that I'm struggling because I fear that she'll think I'm weak. Okay. And there are men that I spoke to say, hey, I was in a relationship and I dare not get emotional around my partner because she would let me know that she doesn't deserve to be with me because she wants a real man, quote unquote. So the pressure that he's under being in that relationship. So my appeal to women is that understanding that do not become so dogmatic in your expectation because your dad might have not showed you the right example, or your brother or your uncle or your grandfather. But the funny thing in all of that is that they were doing things the best way they knew how, coming from the era. Now we're saying breaking the stamina of the stigma around men's mental health means acknowledging and recognizing all the facts, bring everything into the room to be able to say, hey, you know what? maybe as sincere as my dad was, my grandfather was, my coach was, he should not be considered the most credible source, because chances are he himself might have been distracted.
Right. We're all just doing the best we can with what we know.
And
And then before I ask my final question, I guess, is there anywhere you would like to take it? Something I missed, something I didn't cover that you want to talk about?
well, for now, JP, I think we talk about a lot. Just wanted to, let all your listeners know and stuff that, I am available to do one-on-one life coaching. I'm available to just, sometimes I do like a consultation for 10 minutes or so, right? My website is xyspark.org. Reach out to me on Facebook, on Instagram. I'm on TikTok. I'm all over, right? But the most important piece that I want you to say to all your listeners, JP, is understanding this, that in order to break the stamina of the stigma, all of us as men have got to learn to come together and stop having those surface conversations. Stop spending your time to talk about sports and who is the champion of this, who is that, and words of talk about, hey, I am not doing the best. I'm struggling in my relationship with myself. I'm struggling in my relationship with my kids. I'm struggling. I'm isolating. I find I'm drinking a bit more. I'm smoking a bit more. I'm stressed. I'm overwhelmed, and I want to appeal to all the men. If your buddy shares this with you, stop judging him. Stop making him feel like something is wrong with him. Support him. If you don't know how, just close your mouth and be there. Don't tell him, hey man up. You're strong. Let's go drink a couple of beers. Let's go shoot some pool. No. Hey buddy, you know what? I can't help you. But let's do the research together and see if there's anyone out there that can help you. That's how we're going to start breaking the stamina of the stigma around men's mental health. Because guess what? Mental health does not discriminate. Doesn't matter how much muscle you have, how much money you have, how much women you have. Doesn't matter how long you have been married. Doesn't matter your geographical location, your cultural orientation. None of that matters. Mental health does not discriminate. And it's time for us as men to recognize that and do something about it.
That is beautiful. Yeah, it's funny that we notice our physical health and we take steps to do something, but our mental health, we just don't look at it or don't care about it. Rolando, my final question is always, how can people reach you? But you did answer that. So how about for the people who are catching this live, tomorrow you're doing something special. What is that?
Yes. So I'm going to be doing a special, I'm going to be on a program that's actually going to be on the 14th. I'm going to be doing a live event there, and it's going to be talking about emotional intelligence. It's a virtual event. You can sign up for it and you can come into the space. I'll be facilitating a conversation around that. And I want more men, more people to show up. And let these conversations not be what I call an event. Let it be a never-ending wheel that continues to turn, so that we can draw more and more and more men in. Because when we do that, that's how we save the life of a friend, of a brother, of a father, of a cousin, of a co-worker, of a neighbor. That's how, as men, we save a marriage. That's how we save a home from having a single mom, right? That's how we save a mother from struggling on her own because her partner was not brave enough to step out and say, I need help.
Wow. Rolando, thank you so much for your time today. This episode is going to help a lot of people, and I'm really grateful for your time.
Thank you, buddy, and thanks for having me, JP.